Hello, everyone, and welcome to Common Time Podcast, where we bring you world-class professional development for music educators straight to your phone. I'm David Clemmer.
And I'm John Pasquale.
And we are your hosts and fellow music educators. In each episode, we will interview a guest who is an expert in their field, here to provide us insight, strategies, and inspiration to help you elevate your ensemble. Our guest today is Erin Cole Steele from Scottsdale, Arizona. Welcome, Erin.
Thank you. It's such an honor to be here. Thank you so much for the invite.
Absolutely. Erin is the director of the Division of Education and Senior Educational Clinician for Clemmer and was recently appointed as a clinical assistant professor at Arizona State University. Erin previously served as the director of bands at Tapp Middle School in Cobb County, Georgia, where she led that ensemble to a performance at the 58th Annual Midwest Band and Orchestra Clinic. And we are honored to have Erin on the Common Time Podcast to share her journey. And so today we are exploring a blueprint for Midwest with Erin Cole Steele. John, why don't you get us started?
Thanks, David. Hi, Erin. It's always wonderful to see you. So I'm just going to get started right away. Just about your ensemble at Tapp performed at the prestigious Midwest Band and Orchestra Conference. Are you able to tell us about the moment that the students found out, first of all, that they got selected for such an incredible honor? And then what did it mean for them, especially because they were coming from a Title I school?
To be honest, they had no idea I even applied. It wasn't something that I had planned on doing. It was right after our large group performance evaluations. Several folks were kind of encouraging me to apply, and I was like, okay. And, Alfred Watkins, who's a major mentor for me, said, go and apply. Usually it takes a couple times. Don't be disappointed if you get your rejection letter. So I was set up for that, right? I thought, okay, we'll just put our name in the hat, but totally expecting the rejection letter. And I'll never forget, because we had just come back from spring break, and that Monday we got back, we go down and check the mail, and there was a Midwest Clinic packet, not a letter. It's kind of like a college application. You're like, well, what does this mean? This is a packet, not a letter. So myself and my assistants, we go back to the office, we close the door, we open it, and it was the acceptance letter. And I was like, oh my gosh, the students don't even know about this. Like, we're going to tell them tomorrow. And they're like, what is the Midwest Clinic? So right. It was a really neat thing for them because it was totally unexpected, number one, as well as for us, because we weren't expecting the acceptance. But immediately you go through that roller coaster of, we got accepted. Oh God, now what? How are we going to get in there? So that was the first thing. Was I know they're going to be super excited because they think trip, we're going to Chicago, because there's so many of those students that hadn't even been out of the state of Georgia, Mm-hmm. So our number one focus at that point was not only preparing them to get ready for that, but how are we going to do that financially with that trip? So that was kind of the roller coaster we were on.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's amazing. Had no idea. That's fantastic.
Yeah. So the Midwest stage is just such a prestigious stage, really, for any band program. And I'm curious, what were some of the biggest challenges that you faced while you were preparing the ensemble for the performance, and how did you get past them, overcome them?
Yeah, so the biggest hurdle, I think, is what I mentioned, which was the financial piece of things. So we did so many fundraisers. I mean, you name it, we did it. And we had some that were fundraisers for the program, to pay for the programs, to pay, the things that you do that are for the entire band. But then we had individual account fundraisers where students could choose to do certain ones so that they had money in their account for their travel. I quickly hired my dad, who, since he retired as a high school band director, is now in the travel business for bands and orchestras. So I had my dad handle all of our travel, and he knew some of the hurdles we had, with the financial piece. And so I trusted him to make sure we were getting the best prices on everything. But to be honest, it was such a fun experience. Even with all those fundraisers, it was sort of a bonding thing. I mean, we were doing car washes, we were doing a yard sale, we were doing all these things, and it became part of the community to help the Tapp band get to Chicago. And through that, we had so many donations to our program. We had individual donors. We had the high school. McEachern High School has their own trust fund. It used to be a private, it's a whole thing. It was a private school. And with that trust fund, the principal at the time used to be an orchestra director. So he was all in trying to help us. He bought the entire band Land's End winter coats that were all monogrammed with our logo, the students' names, their instrument McEachern High
Wow.
School paid for that for our students because, even the smallest little things like these students from Georgia that most haven't been out of the state don't even have the appropriate outerwear to go to Chicago, right? So they were thinking about that. I was thinking about travel costs. So it was kind of everybody just swooped in and let's help this band get to Chicago. The easiest part actually was preparing the band to play and perform there. That was the easiest part because you have so much time to do that. And we were so thorough we started rehearsing in the summer. So that was the easy part.
Mm-hmm.
It's the getting them there. Yeah.
Yeah. I love that the community came together to help get you there, just to get behind you. That's incredible.
Before we switch gears just a bit, just a follow-up question for our listeners, anyone who's considering applying to go there. Do you have any advice for those people?
Yeah, I think you have to have the building blocks first. You have to be at the program long enough to build a sense of culture and to, culture within the program and the community and with your administration and all those things, but also your fundamentals program and making sure that over several years your program's strong enough to do that. As I said, it wasn't something that I necessarily had on my bucket list. It was something that I thought was going to be further out. So I wasn't anticipating applying that early, but it just worked out that way. I do remember, like when I was in college, I was going to the Midwest Clinic because I was working the booth for University of Georgia. So even in those years, I remember sitting in those concerts, and I specifically remember Cheryl Floyd's band playing at Midwest. And I sat there and went, I have never in my life heard a middle school band sound like that. That is absolutely incredible. And that stuck in my head. Like, that is possible. You can get middle school students to sound like that. And when I ended up taking over the program at TAP, I thought, could this be possible here? I mean, it's totally different community, totally different school situation. We're a Title I school, but I think it can be done, And so it was sort of my goal just to develop a great program like Cheryl's and then eventually apply to do something like that if I felt like we got to that point. So that's kind of how that came about. But my recommendation is just, having a great mentor helps too. Because like I said, Alfred had been to Midwest. He held my hand through that whole process. So having a great mentor and somebody to look up to that knows how to build a program like that.
Yeah, it's a small world. My sister was in Cheryl's band at that concert.
No kidding. I didn't
It's
know
a
that.
small room. Yeah, that I still remember that concert. It was pretty incredible. Jaw-dropping, actually.
Yeah.
So just to kind of shift a bit in terms of elements of a successful ensemble or successful band program. So to be able to recruit is such a critical part of the process. Are you able to kind of talk us through your own approach and any kind of strategies that have been helpful or effective for you?
Sure. Yeah, I'm super passionate about this topic, recruitment and retention, because it's the key to developing what I was saying, and that's your culture, right? So for me, I'm just going to kind of talk about a few things that seem to work well for us. We had several touch points during the year that we would actually do our instrument testing and recruitment process, giving students and parents several times to become part of our program. So we would have spring instrument testing night. We would also do it in the summer, and then we had the first 2 weeks of the school year in the fall. So there were several times that they had the opportunity. We had 90% of the school in band, orchestra, and choir, and the majority of those were in bands. So our school typically had anywhere from 700 to 800 students. I usually had about 450 students in the band program. So a large number of that school was just in band. Now, I will say that in Cobb County, Georgia, and you guys know this, it's a culture there and unto itself, right? We are very fortunate to have a lot of support in Cobb County, so that helps. But I do think it comes down to the director, their personality, how long they've been there, creating that culture within the community, and you're there long enough. I mean, I hit that milestone of, when the student walks in and goes, "Oh, you taught my mom," and you're like, is that possible? You do the math, you're like, yeah, I guess it is. So, but you have the brothers and sisters and all that, and it just starts to feed itself because the program is successful, but more importantly, the parents know it's the best place on that campus for their child to be. And that's part of the music program. We also had a fabulous relationship with our feeder elementary schools. We would go over there all the time to perform for them. We'd take our small ensembles to perform. They come over to our school in the spring. Our band performs for them. I would go over and visit often. But I was a big proponent of making sure our program was all-encompassing elementary school through 12th grade, and especially once they get to us, the 6 through 12 program. And because we work so well, elementary, middle school, and the high school directors, it was just one cohesive program. And it wasn't if I go into band in middle school or if I go into band in high school, it was when, when do I get to start? So it was when you're there long enough to set that up, it then just starts to feed itself.
Yeah, so you just mentioned retention and kind of we're just stepping into retention. And I know for a lot of our listeners, and we all struggle at some point with maintaining participation in the program and the shift from elementary to middle to high school. So I'm curious, could you go a little further with sort of your retention efforts and what kept your students motivated and in their seats every day?
Yeah, I think there's so many things that come into play with retention. One, you have to keep the excitement there for your students and wanting to be part of it. And that can happen through your literature selection even, So of course we all want to be playing the standards and the things that we want our students to play for evaluation, all that. But I think it's also good to throw them a bone every now and then. We would do a Halloween concert where they get to dress up and, make it fun for that. We do a spring pops concert that's in conjunction with the high school band, where the high school director conducts. Again, it's building that bridge from middle school to high school. As many programs do, we do 8th grade night where they go over to the football game at the high school. And to be honest with you, that's one of the best things that we do. However, that happens in September or October. And then with those 8th graders, what happens, if they had to sign on the dotted line right then, 100% of those kids would be going on high school band, right? They come off that with a high like, oh my gosh, this is the best thing ever. But then the counselors get to them, the coaches get to, you name it, their parents even saying, well, you got to take this AP class, blah, 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 you can't do band. So I think it's important from that time through the end of the year when they're having to actually sign up for classes at the high school that you continue to do activities. You continue to build that bridge through the high school. We would have our drum majors at the high school write letters to every one of those 8th graders telling them, hey, we really enjoyed having you at 8th grade night. Don't forget about us. We're going to have, and the sections would have little parties throughout the year and invite the 8th graders to that. We also had our 8th grade band parents that were heavily involved with the high school band boosters during that 8th grade year, volunteering to help with selling things at football games and, running concessions. And I think if you get the parents bought in, then they're going to make sure their student continues on into high school. So yeah, there's several pieces that come into that. Field trips, you have to keep that excitement. But I also think you can't forget about, it's almost like we teach to the middle a lot of times. You can't forget about those students that are really excelling, your all-state level kids, continuing to keep them challenged so they don't get bored. But at the same time, the students that maybe are not your huge band nerds that want to do all-state, they're just there because they want to be part of something, you want to have a great time. And there's a place for them too, right? And keeping their excitement going. Yeah.
Indeed. So then another pillar of a successful program is classroom management. So how did you engage in effective classroom management? And do you have any strategies that help keep students focused and on task during the rehearsal process?
Yes. So for me, I never like to actually call it classroom management. I like to call it classroom routines because I think with the young students, it's all about setting up the parameters and the routines that are expected in that class every single day. I'll be perfectly honest with you. The school that I taught at, behavior school-wide was not necessarily the best. In fact, the hallways, they were crazy. But the students knew from day one, when they start in 6th grade, which is when we start our beginners, the second they step on that carpet in the tap band room, it's a different experience. And this is the expectation. You come in quiet. Everything was so laid out, but from day one. So when all of those sixth graders come in, and we would have, 120 in each class, come in the first day, I stand at the door and I go like this. And I say, we're not talking, coming in. They're like, oh, I mean, business in here. And then they come in and they have a name tag in every single chair. They know where they're sitting. You're sitting in first row. Here's your name tag. Don't talk, just have a seat. It's still, though, we're greeting them. It's still a comforting environment, but there's a routine set up from the very beginning. Then that very first day, we don't have instruments or anything like that. It's me talking to them about the culture in this band program. The reason we had you come in quietly is because, and I explain that. And I think they have to understand, even from the very first day, the why behind it. Why are the rules the way they are in this room? Why do we expect you to do this? Because it's going to enable you to be a better player, because it's going to be quiet, because there's so many students in here. We have to have organization coming into the room. So if they understand the why behind it, and then they see the results of that kind of routine coming into the room, and they understand it, then you're good, right? And I think you can't let up. If you're a new teacher out there, whatever you see as your vision of coming into the room and how your rehearsals are going to be paced and what your expectations are, it has to be that way every single time. You can't have a day off. This isn't like free day. This is how we do this every single day. And this is
Right.
part of the tap band, procedures and routines.
I love that you think of this as a routine, like it's something we just program almost and create structure for them, and they respond. I'm curious though, how do you balance that style of classroom management with fostering a creative and welcoming space for all the kids?
Yeah. So once that routine is set and they're, like you said, programmed, that's just inherently what they do every day. So it's not, I never ever raise my voice. It's never ever one of those things. It's just, that's what we do. That's our culture. And then you can just teach. I mean, it was never kind of a space where students felt like they couldn't raise their hand or it wasn't that type of situation at all. And I think it's explaining it to them in a way that we care about you and we really want you to be successful. So you have to trust us. This is going to be the best environment for teaching and for you for learning. But, you're going to have, with that many students, you're going to have the ones that kind of kick back a little bit and want to push it. And you just either have to remind them, if it doesn't stick, pull them to the side, meet with them individually. What's going on? Hey, this is part of what we do here. Do you still want to be a part of our program? Maybe even talking to the parent. But I think once you have them bought into that, there's no sense of, oh gosh, I'm scared, or that, that person's too strict. It's more of, they're proud of the routines and proud of the culture that we have in our room.
So just to change gears again, just a bit, setting a solid foundation is so important for young players, but all of us, frankly. But how do you approach teaching fundamental techniques, and how early do you begin this process with your students?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, as most of us do, we have method books that we use with our beginners, and we start our students with essential elements. However, every student has a binder, and besides having their essential elements book, there's so much supplemental material that we give to our students that we use throughout as well. And it's sort of like what I was just explaining about. The students have to understand the why behind everything, explaining why fundamentals are important, explaining why we're working on this, because then you're going to be able to apply it to this piece of music we're working on. And I think from the very beginning, if they understand that even when they're in 7th and 8th grade, it's a completely different situation, because we move a little, we're moving away from a method book, but we're still spending a ton of time. And I don't even call it warm up. I call it our fundamentals program. We spend a ton of time on that. So even with our more advanced players, they have that black 3-ring binder, so many different warm up scales, chorales, all those things are in their binder. And we'll spend a large percentage of time on our fundamentals program, especially at the beginning of the year, working on those things so that when they get their music, they can play those the
Yeah.
things that we're working on. So I can't tell you, and you guys are probably the same, how many times you listen to a band or evaluate, judge a band, and they're playing a piece of music, let's say in the key of A flat, but it's obvious that they're not working on the key of A flat on a daily basis in order to do that. Or they're working on a grade 4 piece where the trumpet and clarinet range is really high, but they're not comfortable up there. It's because they're not working on that in the fundamentals program. So I always make sure I explain to them the reason we're spending so much time on this is because you remember in this piece, it correlates, right? We've got to get comfortable with that in order to do this. And it's sort of like dangling the sheet music in front of them, the pieces that we're working on. If we can do this correctly, then you're going to sound really good on, these measures. And it's just explaining that to them. I think the more they understand the why, the easier it is to convince them this is why we're working on these fundamentals. But with young students, I also think it's important to change it up. I do a session that's called Hiding the Vegetables, and it came out of my mom when I was little, making things and hiding the vegetables in there so I would get those vitamins and things I need. So we're trying to make sure young students get those vitamins that they need. But you have to change it up, because the second it becomes too routine, they're just going through the motions, right? They're not actually engaging in what you're working on that day because they do the same thing every single day. So you can still work on the same concept, but change it up by using a different warm-up that's in their packet or a different book that's on the stand that day. So just being intuitive enough to go, oh, they're going on automatic pilot. We need to change that up tomorrow. So
I love that, hiding the vegetables. I never even thought about that. It's so perfect. And if you don't do that, you're right. It just becomes autopilot in a negative way, where they're just going through the motions.
Grade level, even
Yeah,
high
right.
school students. Yeah.
Even
For
college
college,
students.
the college is exactly the same way. And, students check out. They know I've got this 10 or 15 minutes that I don't have to be engaged. I just do the same things, and then we'll get to something else. So I hide the vegetables. I love it. So many great concepts and things that we've talked about today. Just looking back at your entire journey to the Midwest stage, and knowing that there are other people like you when you were younger thinking about, I saw a band here, I heard an ensemble here. I'd love to have that experience someday. Do you have some advice that we could give band directors that are striving to take their programs to that next level?
Mm-hmm. I'm going to come back to find yourself a really great mentor. And it needs to be somebody that has had a lot of experience in creating and building a program, because that's what you're going to be doing, and it's even more so than just playing at Midwest. It's creating a culture that the students and the parents really want to be a part of. And it's just going to keep growing and fostering over the years, because that's just the Midwest thing. That's just a piece of it, right? That's kind of a feather in the cap. But to be honest with you, for our students, that performance was more than just performing. That was a momentous occasion where they got to go all the way to Chicago and go to all these museums they've never been at. From the littlest thing, they still talk about Ed Debevix. And the reason I know they still talk about it is, if you remember, a couple of years ago, Midwest got canceled in person because of COVID. Mm-hmm. And what they did instead was a virtual kind of online thing where they selected performances through the year, through all the years of Midwest. And we were one of those that got selected. And so when I found out they were featuring our performance, I put something up on Facebook, to these students that were in that band, saying, hey, check this out. I can't believe it. They're going to kind of, highlight our performance. If you can, watch it. It blew up, and all these students that were, I say students, they're now adults with their own kids, but it went crazy on Facebook. And so it became a reunion type thing. And organically, they put those jackets on from when they were in 7th and 8th grade, that the McEachern High School band, and they started taking pictures. It became a thing of themselves trying to fit in their middle school jacket
That's
and
awesome.
talking about all their memories from Midwest. And as you would expect, the things that were the imprint for them weren't necessarily that 45-minute performance on stage. While that was great, it was all the things we did to get there they talked about. While we were there, all the museums they went to, the restaurants they went to, the bus ride on the Mafia tour, all these things that they remember from that were just crazy. And, we were so fortunate because right after our performance, the United States Marine Band was playing. And they were, it was in the Hilton, back when it was at the Hilton. And they were going to be waiting backstage when we came off. And I told the students that. I said, when you come off behind that curtain, the best military band and musicians you'll ever hear will be standing there. And that is your opportunity to go introduce yourself, get your picture taken. And so they were so excited to finish their performance, to come off to see the Marine Band back there. So, it was those things that were the imprint for them, and that jacket and that community building with their band going on that trip. So, that's what you have to think of as an educator. It's more than just that performance on stage. This is going to be an imprint that's going to last forever for those students. So.
Man, that's a beautiful story.
Isn't teaching great? Just hearing stories like that is just, it's so inspiring. I just love it. So, Erin, we ask some questions of all of our guests, and I'll take the first one. Do you have a particular book or books that have inspired you through your teaching journey that you want to share with our listeners?
Sure. Actually, they're right behind me. So the teaching music through performance books are my go-tos. And now that I'm doing some teaching at the collegiate level, it's kind of the Bibles of what we do, right? The whole series of teaching music through performance are so fantastic and a great resource. In addition to that, there's, the books Rehearsing the Middle School Band, Rehearsing the High School Band, that are really valuable. But I encourage everybody to, no matter where you are in your teaching journey, to find a book that also will help you with the balance of teaching in life, right? We want to have our resources, like these fantastic resources we all probably know about. But this is one, and I have it here because I keep it with me all the time, that I'm reading right now. I don't know if you can see that, but the title of it is The Things You Can See Only When You Slow Down. Because as we all do, it's part of our personalities as music educators, we burn the candle at both ends. And I have been very guilty of that. And I think now that I'm older, I try and not be that way. So I'm trying to read books that encourage me to kind of slow down,
right?
Take a breath, take a minute, find those things outside of what we do, and have those outlets and those hobbies. But this book is fantastic. The Things You Can See Only When You Slow Down. And I read a chapter every night before I go to bed because it just kind of helps me put things in perspective and calm down. So have these great resources, but have something else too.
Yep. I love it. Finding that balance is so important. It just is, just because this business does take a lot of time and energy, the output. And when do you ever turn and do things for ourselves? And that I know as a young teacher, I was the same way. Didn't take time for myself.
Even currently, I am terrible at this.
This is why I'm trying to be better. And that translates into the classroom, right? If you're burnt out, you're not giving your best to those students. So that's why I'm trying to be better.
Yep. We all are. So our final question is perhaps the most important question, Erin, and it is this. What is your favorite time signature?
Yeah. That's so funny. You know what? I'm going to say 6/8. And the reason I say that is probably the one I hate the most to teach to young students, but that's why. Because there's not a lot of music written in 6/8 time for young students. And then when I find something, I'm like, oh, I'm going to pick this because I'm up to the challenge. I want to teach these young students how to play in 6/8 time.
That's absolutely right.
I know that's weird, but it's like, it's just something different and something that's not your typical 4/4, 3/4, 2/4, but 6/8. I'm going to go with that.
We're going to record the answer, but the correct answer was Common Time. Just wanted to put that out there.
Common Time.
Common Time podcast.
Common Time.
So, Erin, it's been a pleasure hearing you today, and there's so many nuggets, music ed nuggets for our listeners and for myself and John. I just really appreciate your time. Thank you so much for being with us.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It was a blast. Thank you.
Absolutely. Okay, everyone, that's a wrap for this episode of Common Time Podcast. We hope you gain some valuable insights and inspiration to take back to your ensemble. New episodes of Common Time Podcast drop every Monday. We hope you enjoy the show. Please take a moment to leave us a rating or a review on your favorite podcast platform. It really helps us reach more music educators just like you. And a special thanks to our wives, Jessica and Theresa, for keeping us organized enough to make this happen. Also, don't forget to follow us on your favorite social media platforms at Common Time Podcast for updates, behind-the-scenes content, and more. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll catch you in the next episode. Keep making music and keep making a difference.